The first ever Overwatch World Cup in the Overwatch 2 era is off to a great start. Watching 40 countries compete for 15 spots to BlizzCon was a nice change of pace in the esports scene. Cheering on all these countries brought back some serious nostalgia. Just having so many teams with so many new players, and even countries for that matter, competing for glory is the exact change of pace that the esports scene has been looking for. And now, after 2 hard-fought weeks, the 15 teams joining China at BlizzCon this fall have been decided. Let's take a look at how the groups went and give some concluding thoughts. Just given how big and competitive it was, the EMEC region is the surefire place to start. And let's preface this by saying that these groups definitely did not go completely according to plan. I mean, just take a look at Group A. Anything look out of place here to you? Hint hint, it's Spain. What a shocking turn of events to see these guys make it in over Denmark and the Netherlands. Spain, a team mostly full of unknowns, were one of the most competitive teams of the entire qualifier. These guys managed to get second place in perhaps the most amazing underdog World Cup qualifying run we have ever seen. It's already impressive as it is to be so relevant in a region with so many stacked countries, but it's completely different in itself when you also do it with a relatively unknown team like this. Outside of Helv and maybe Hera, I'd say most people didn't know jack squat about Spain, and they're out here competing against some of the most famous European countries in the game. But at the end of the day, that's the World Cup for you, right? This event has been the epic beginning of many pro players' careers in the past, and it looks like some of Spain's roster could be on that trajectory as well. Their entire team from top to bottom looked outstanding. What made Spain so amazing is how it felt like just about anybody could be the reason you lose. Their teamwork was some of the best we've seen. They looked cool, calm, and collected, which is not something that you'd expect from an unknown competitor like this. They saw the pedigrees of some of these other countries and didn't even bat an eye. They were fearless out there, and probably the most clutch performer of any team as well. They won on a map 3 on 3 different occasions, and the fact that 2 of them came against top-level rosters in Denmark and France is absolutely absurd. The expectations for Spain were not that high. They absolutely shattered the goalpost for most people, in what was easily the most compelling underdog story of the qualifiers, period. They came absolutely out of nowhere and became at least my favorite team to watch without a doubt. And I look forward to watching their story continue this October. And with Spain making it in, we had the surprise of Denmark collapsing. In my honest opinion, Denmark felt like one of the shoo-ins to make it out of their group. This team had some fantastic players, including a pretty scary DPS line, and at first, things were looking pretty good for them. Hell, they were even the only team to beat the UK during the groups. They literally took care of arguably the hardest part of the schedule, but they ended up choking. I just have no other way to describe it. While Spain were clutching out map 3s, they were losing them. They were in nearly every single game they played, but losses to France and Spain unfortunately sealed their fate. With how good EMEC is, it kind of felt like something was bound to go wrong. It just so happens that Denmark got the short end of the stick. Outside of that, I'd say that Group A mostly went as anticipated. Great Britain and France played about as well as they should. They had arguably 2 of the most stacked rosters heading into this thing, and they showed exactly why with some pretty good performances. EMEC Group A was by far and none the most entertaining aspect of the qualifiers. It had a lot of awesome countries, close games, and amazing storylines, and if you missed out, I highly recommend watching back some of those matches, especially any involving Spain or that Denmark versus UK game. They were all bangers. Unfortunately though, EMEC Group B wasn't as interesting. Saudi Arabia and Finland absolutely tore through the competition, and the only maps they ended up dropping were against each other. I mean, they cruised through every other opponent that came their way, and they had their spots locked up literally days before this event was over. Saudi Arabia and Finland were so much better than everybody else. The region was incredibly lopsided. But hey, good on them for capitalizing, right? they made it look easy because they actually are pretty darn good. Saudi Arabia showed off what their country's been developing for years now. Their coordination and confidence from that contenders roster was very apparent. Quartz and Yazan were a star DPS line and one of the most exciting bright spots of the qualifiers. In Finland, they felt more so like a group of close guys with combined talent from the old and new eras just trying to have some fun. It was pretty cool to see Sauda have a real chance to actually dominate after rotting on the bench of Florida, and Massa also was a pretty pleasant surprise for a guy that's been retired for a year now. I think we all kind of suspected that Finland would be in the thick of it and they'd be one of the better teams of their group, but they blew me away. I did not expect them to run away with it like this, nor even make it through their group to begin with. Their roster looked pretty good out there, very decisive stuff, and they 100% earned this spot with their kinds of excellent performances, and this just might end up being the best Finnish squad that we have seen since 2016. But just because this group wasn't close doesn't mean that it had zero surprises whatsoever. The elephant in the room is going to be Sweden. I think a lot of us definitely thought they were going to be a lot better. Kevster and Sparker were perhaps one of the most dangerous DPS duos in the entire qualifier. But as we found out the hard way, just because they have a couple of appealing names doesn't actually mean that they'll be good enough. Overwatch is a team game, and their performance showed us exactly why. Sweden at certain times were, no offense, kind of crap. Kevster and Sparker were playing on ping, and the rest of the roster, for the most part, was not getting the job done. Having a former DPS player on flex support, amongst a couple of other things, really ended up hurting them. 3 and 4 is pretty disappointing for a team that a lot of people fully expected to make it out of their group. Seeing them come out of the gate so slow was pretty sad. And in return for this poor performance, Norway took advantage, surprisingly. A team that nobody seemed to think that highly of in this group almost ended up making it to BlizzCon with a respectable 5-2 outing. The Norwegian legend Onigod came back to represent his country for the 5th time in a row, and he made the most of it. He turned back the clock to his prime days, and he was a real leader and standout player, not just for his country, but for EU in general. And with that, our 5 teams from EU have been decided. Saudi Arabia, Finland, UK, France, Spain. We'll see you at BlizzCon. Let's take a look at who's joining them out of the Americas. And, well, nothing too out of the ordinary here. Americas was the least entertaining region, at least in my opinion. There was no real upset or big surprise. Group A was led by the US, absolutely stomping everybody. I mean, not even Canada stood a chance. I mean, they literally were just scrimming for the first time like a day prior to this event, and you have the Toronto drama on top of it, and it still made absolutely zero difference. The Canada game was like the only one where they actually tried. The others were complete and utter memes. I'm talking literally everybody on the team off-rolling at the same exact time. And yes, this includes the long-awaited return of Super on DPS. Aside from that, Group A was pretty standard, I'd say. Canada rolled through just about everybody not named the US, and Mexico also managed to make their way in. Surprisingly though, it actually came down to the last game for Mexico when they played Puerto Rico. Somehow, some way, frickin' Papa Joe, the meme himself, had a chance to make BlizzCon. That is some absolutely crazy stuff. It's just that in the end, Mexico's teamwork and foundation was respectable enough to get them by Puerto Rico and secure that final spot in Group A. In Group B, things were even more lopsided. South America is a dead region with mostly unknowns and retired players, and the results reflect upon this. Colombia and Brazil had it pretty easy out there. Again, not too surprising. Brazil had literally an entire roster of former South American contenders players, some of which are former champions. Watching these guys back at it after 2 years of retirement was pretty darn cool, and I'm glad to see them making it to the group stage for the first time since 2016. But honestly, the real standout for me has to be Colombia. They went undefeated, only dropping a single map. Most of their guys are either unknowns or retired, or EQO. Speaking of EQO, what a treat it was to watch this guy play on the big stage again. It's been a couple years since we've heard this guy's name, and he's an Overwatch League legend and a fan favorite, so it was really awesome. It really triggered some big-time nostalgia that reminded me almost of 2018 in a way, with how he was clutching, along with his diverse hero pool. He was everything that you'd hope he'd be. And Colombia themselves were at least kind of entertaining. EQO's DPS partner Eternal came out of absolutely nowhere, here, and boy was it sick to watch Super Gomez bust out the Zarya. You know they're not going to go anywhere come BlizzCon, but man was it sick to watch this country make it the furthest they ever have in World Cup history. Brazil, US, Canada, Colombia, Mexico, you're going to BlizzCon. And then there's the APAC region. Honestly, it was a bit more straightforward than we were hoping for. Nothing spicy to be found, just like in the Americas. In Group A, it went exactly how you'd think. South Korea dominating, with everybody else struggling from behind. Korea messed around for most of their qualifiers and got the easy 5-0 with no dropped maps. Honestly, they were like the US. Sometimes they'd get super silly, like Sparkle playing Doomfist or falling off the map, all of their team off-rolling, and perhaps the quickest Circuit Royale win of all time. They held the Philippines to 0.07 meters and then proceeded to win their attack in a grand total of 4 seconds. Only at the World Cup, ladies and gentlemen. Only at the World Cup. And I mean, outside of that L to Korea, Japan was also in pretty good shape. Their team full of Pacific contenders talent really shined through. The synergy and mechanics were far superior to everybody else not named Korea, which made this an easy series for them as well. And locking down that final spot would be Hong Kong, who also have a lot of Pacific contenders talent, and outside of their Japan and Korea games, they took care of business, so good on them for making it through over Taiwan. And if you were hoping Group B would be any better like myself, you were sadly mistaken. Australia and Thailand ran away with this thing. When your roster is either OWL or contenders level, I suppose that's going to happen though. Thankfully, when these two actually got a chance to play each other, it was really good. Australia ended up prevailing since they're just so insanely talented, but Thailand definitely surprised me. We knew they were pretty decent, but they managed to win pretty decisively to make it here. Thailand's been the most relevant they've ever been since arguably 2016. It has been quite some time. I really wasn't sure if it was going to be them or India making it out of groups, and for me, sadly, I picked wrong. Their rivalry did not disappoint though, and was largely the only competitive nail-biting experience not just of Group B, but in APAC in general. India and Thailand went all the way to a map 3. It was a really good game, and the winner of that one was going to go to BlizzCon. I was kinda hoping that India were going to take it because I find their team really fun, plus their videos go pretty hard, but alas, it just wasn't meant to be. The two teams with the biggest number of pros would move on to join Korea, Japan, and Hong Kong to represent APAC. APAC had its glamour, but kinda like America, it definitely was lacking compared to EU, which was a lot more competitive. Regardless, that's now all 16 tickets punched to BlizzCon. The World Cup qualifiers are officially over. Now for a quick review of my thoughts on this event. In general, it was pretty good. You really can't expect all that much from qualifiers. It's how you weed out all of the weak countries from the strong ones. And if you were disappointed, then your expectations were probably too high. This in general is a time to rejoice. It's one of the community's favorite events, and it's finally back after like a good 4 years. And it's also the first time we're witnessing it in the Overwatch 2 era. Witnessing so many fans rep their teams was a breath of fresh air, and that's what makes it worth it. No matter the expectations, no matter the roster, it's cool to watch amazing fans from 40 different countries come together to watch a true global event. There were ups and there were downs, but just having something like this again was truly wonderful. It's a nice change of pace compared to OWL or Contenders, and some of the matches were truly amazing, and the nostalgia, at least for me, was through the roof. There was genuinely so much interest in this event, and that's what puts the biggest smile on my face. With co-streaming being allowed on Twitch, so many content creators that usually don't get involved with Pro Overwatch were able to enjoy themselves. It truly benefited this scene a lot to have them around, and I hope it serves as an example as to what we could be capable of if we don't limit ourselves. All in all, I truly loved the Overwatch World Cup qualifier experience. There was non-stop action for 2 weeks, and it felt so good to finally have this all-time classic back. However, it definitely came with some cons. For starters, the balancing of this event was a little weird. It's great to give South American and APAC teams a chance and all, but with talent from EU in particular, it felt like a few good teams ended up getting snubbed just because they play in a more stacked region with more teams with the same amount of spots on the line. To a certain extent, it makes EU special, and I appreciate that. But but I can't help but feel like some of these teams making it to the groups over them will end up being a bore come October. I don't want to sound like a jerk or anything, but I just feel like this type of format was a little too limiting. It probably made the most sense logistically, which I can understand, it's just a little frustrating. Issue number 2 was toxicity and the moderation of chat. There was way too much blatant transphobia amongst a couple of other issues on social media, and even the broadcast. Sometimes the hammer would come out really fast and we'd snip it by the bud, but other times these problems would build up because there was a lack of moderation, and things would get very toxic. But it goes beyond the live stream chat. Pride and transphobia was a constant theme the last couple of weeks, and it put a sour note on an otherwise fantastic event. I'll spare you all the details, but I just thought I'd throw this in here because it was a very prevalent aspect of the qualifiers that definitely brought the mood down. The other thing to bring up is the spectating. I'm not sure how many people were invested into spectating player POVs, but sometimes they were lacking. Not enough emphasis was being put on the big, pivotal plays of matches, and honestly sometimes they were spectating certain roles a lot more than others. Support in particular felt like it got the short end of the stick. I'm sure it's going to be a lot better at BlizzCon, but a little more effort here in the present could have gone a long way, as I'm sure there were plenty of first-time Overwatch esports spectators watching these streams, and it would have been very helpful for them to get the full experience. Again, I'm more so nitpicking here. I know it's going to be better later on. I'm just saying that there's definitely things they could have improved upon to make the experience even more satisfying. But nonetheless, the 2023 World Cup qualifiers have come and gone. Having something this important to our community make its long-awaited return is absolutely amazing, and I just can't wait to see the remaining combatants go at it later this fall at BlizzCon. When dates and details are revealed, I'll be sure to make an extensive video covering all of the important information. But until then, make sure to stay tuned and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of my future World Cup videos. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.